Hi everyone, and welcome to the Science Out East podcast from the University of East London. I am Karl Smith, Head of Research Excellence, and your host today. So, on today's episode, we will be discussing the told and untold stories from science. So I'm very pleased to announce I've got two very special guests with me today. Dr Sheeba Viswarajan. She is a senior lecturer at the University of East London. And I'm also very pleased to announce that we're joined by James Brown, and he is the director of the British Science Festival. And in fact, University of East London is hosting this year's edition of the British Science Festival. So we're really pleased about that at UEL. So Sheeba, I'm aware that you have been doing some research on the overlooked stories in science. Could you tell us why those stories may be overlooked?
I think a lot could be because we don't know. And we are based in London at the moment, right? So within our practice, we rely on our textbooks in schools. We rely on the materials that are easily available. And I'm talking about teaching science at Key Stage 3, 4 and 5. It's very much Eurocentric. And those are the examples of the scientists that we give to students. We talk about Einstein, Oppenheimer, Darwin. Occasionally we'll talk about Marie Curie or Rosalind Franklin. But when you look at the classrooms, they're very diverse. And over the years, the diversity is increasing in East London. But sadly, our curriculum does not represent that. So if I've got a diverse set of learners, where are the diverse set of scientists that I can talk about in the class? As teachers, they don't have time to go and search for these scientists. And that's where I think it's the ignorance. And it's not deliberate, it's just that we don't know. And my belief is we will know more if we ask our students and they share with us about their own countries, the countries that they come from, because they bring in that richness. So I believe that's why the stories are overlooked.
And I think it's great to hear your proposal there that teachers should perhaps think about asking the students in their class who is significant in science from their own country, within their own background. But is there anything else you think we could be doing to help diversify our curriculum and to expand our lens, which absolutely has been very Western focused or West focused?
I think we need to be conscious that when we talk about examples, we go and search for examples from all over the world. We look, and again, it's the same point. We don't have enough time as teachers to do that research. So maybe the universities and subject associations can take up that challenge and develop a database of researchers, scientists from all over the world, and the publishers could start embedding those examples in the textbook. So by the time a GCSE student gets a textbook or a Key Stage 3 Year 7 student gets that textbook, they can then read it and see pictures of scientists and their contributions from all over the world. Because as a student, science is, as it is, quite hard subject for many. And when students see someone like them doing amazing work in the field of science, they feel motivated. So the representation needs to be improved.
And listen to that. So what I'm hearing there is really getting those case studies. It's sharing them by the materials students receive, which might be textbooks. But again, it's also that co-creation piece, okay? So maybe we need to also challenge who are traditional gatekeepers of the knowledge which is being shared with the next generation, okay? So what I'm also keen though to hear from you, Sheeba, is how did you yourself begin to take an interest in this area in terms of the stories of science? Indeed, what's your own science or own research story?
Well, my research topic is about the effectiveness of science practicals at GCSEs. And currently I'm working at UEL as a senior lecturer on the secondary teacher training team. And within my role, I do go and observe science lessons all around London and the South. So when I go to observe lessons, I don't see that representation when the teacher is teaching or during discussions. But when I walk into the school and I'll go navigate the various corridors, I see in most schools, I would see photos of scientists or achievers from the BAME community, and they're on the board and they're celebrated. And I know in assemblies they will talk about them, but it doesn't trickle into the classroom. When they're studying science, those examples are not included. So for me, a lot seems tokenistic that, yes, we've got pictures on the board, so we've ticked that box, but we need to actively engage them in the classroom. So that was from my lesson observations. And so over the years, this feeling I started feeling quite uneasy that this kind of a disconnect is there. We've got photos, but in the classroom, there isn't much discussion. And then recently, the government has made changes to the the scholarship and the bursaries that are available for the overseas physics trainees. So overseas physics specialists can now apply for teacher training in the UK, and they get the same bursary as a UK applicant. And that has seen an increase in the previously shortage subject. We see an increase in physics teacher trainees or the applications. So within my course, I now have a lot of overseas trainees, and that brings, so 50% of my course would involve trainees from Lebanon, Nigeria, India, China, Pakistan. So it's fantastic. So now suddenly in my class, when I talk about science, people can say, I could ask them, okay, so we're talking about erosion. Tell us about how erosion has affected your country. And then they could talk about, then they would bring in, because they would have relatives send photos for them, and then we could look at those photos in the class. We could talk about your own scientists from your part of the world. We're talking about this topic. Could you have some, input there? And it just seemed that the participatory nature increased. So it was co-creation of content. And it wasn't, because if I went to find people, it would need a lot of time, and I wouldn't have found everyone that they knew. So I think they became ambassadors of their own country, and I felt my curriculum would become richer. And now I see the course over the years, I want the course to evolve and become more diverse and inclusive because of the people that were there within my cohort. So I want to represent their parts of the world within my course. And that is what this unveiling the hidden faces is about.
And I think this is fantastic, because what I'm hearing here, Sheeba, if we want to change the paradigm, it's not just about changing the textbooks and introducing people to scientists who they may not have heard of, who aren't white men, but equally having the people who are teaching them themselves, they can be real role models, yeah? Mm-hmm. So having people who are teaching from other countries, other ethnicities, I think is really, really vital. Mm-hmm. But now I'm going to switch over to James Brown, because as I said, it is the British Science Festival, which University of East London are hosting, and we're really pleased that James has joined us. So can you tell us about your story, and especially a little more about the British Science Festival and indeed the British Science Association?
Certainly. So yes, I work for the British Science Association, and we've been hosting the British Science Festival since about 1831, I think the first
1831?
1831, yes. So it's very long established. I think It's Europe's longest standing science festival. And what's at the heart of it really is that it's a space for scientists, but also non-scientists to come together to discuss, to debate, to share new ideas, to share stories, and to think about how science is helping us solve problems that we face as a society. Yes, this year we've got 5 days of events. Everything's completely free. Absolutely everything's open to everyone. And we want people to come along and meet scientists, talk to scientists, challenge them, ask them questions, and find out about some of the amazing research and innovation that's going on across the country.
And actually, off the top of your head, James, if you were going to try and sell the British Science Festival to our listeners, are there any specific sessions, workshops, which you think are an absolute... Well, they're all a must, I'm sure. But which ones have really caught your eye this year?
It's going to be hard to choose. There's a lot going on. I think we've got just over 100 events taking place over the 5 days. And we've got everything from cutting-edge science research being presented by scientists. We've got exhibitions. We've got a dance workshop. We've got a drag show. We've got musical performances. We've got walking tours. There's a VR escape room. There's really a little bit of everything. There's so much going on. Some of the things that I'm looking forward to most, we've got an amazing music and vision session that's happening on Saturday night. So we've got these live coding musicians who create music through coding, and they also create these visuals that go along with it, and they do that all in real time as they're sort of working the crowd and sort of DJing as well, which I think is going to be great.
But what I'm hearing then, James, you mentioned a range of different things there. And you mentioned, for example, the drag show and, of course, the music and visual elements and all kinds of other things that what really struck me, it's not pure science. And I think that's a way we get people in through the door. People, you mentioned the word science, it's such a turn-off. A lot of scientists are very keen musicians. Many paint, they're involved in all manner of the arts. And I think it's really important that we also change the perception of what a scientist is. So it's not just a white man, and equally it's not just what we call a nerd or a geek. And I don't think those should be offensive terms, by the way, because I'm a bit of a geek, I guess, to some degree, but that there's so much more than just a scientist. And I think what I'm hearing from both of you is those human stories. There's a humanity to science, okay? So Sheeba, if you're a scientist listening at home to the podcast, and you want to share your research findings with the world, what would be the conventional ways of doing this?
Well, as a researcher, you share your findings through journal articles, attending conferences, and these take time, and you've got to meet the standards, and your article needs to be accepted for a journal before it's published. So it needs to be peer reviewed, and all of these take a lot of time. Maybe about 3 months or longer. So, in fact, if you're a researcher and you've done research on the area that we're talking about, it's possible that your findings are coming out in a journal article, or you're presenting at BIRA, maybe that's on September this year, next week. But it won't get trickled down to the classroom because these journal articles are not easily accessible, and they are not written in a very simple language that a student or a teacher can read and understand very quickly. So these are long articles with methodology sections, whereas people frontline, we just need information, what needs to be done in a very concise manner. So I think I'm digressing, but as a scientist, you would publish, you could go and write blogs, create your own websites, maybe publish through the subject associations. But those are the things that come to mind. Maybe write books as well. James, maybe you've got other suggestions?
No, I think that covers it, doesn't it? I think it's a very specialised talent, isn't it? Writing research papers, and it's a very particular way of sort of communicating, very precise, and making sure that people can understand exactly what you've done in experiments, and that's all very clear, and that's reproducible by other people who pick that up. But what it's not is suitable for the general public to get a good understanding if it's a new topic to them.
And I think it's just worth adding here. Listen to this. So. In science, yes, absolutely. Journal publications. That's the conventional route of sharing your research. But that means the people who edit the journals, the people who manage them, they again very much act as the gatekeepers of science. And I think that's something we all need to be conscious of. who are those gatekeepers? Are they acting in the best interest of all researchers, especially researchers who perhaps aren't working in the West, I think. And these are all really pertinent points. And I think this is probably something that you're trying to do, James, with the British Science Festival, is to broaden the different routes that scientists can use to share their research. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, research journals and research papers are great for experts, but, that's a very niche audience. Most people aren't going to spend their time reading research journals. So what we want to try and do is make sure that, what is important about that research? What's the impact it's going to have on people's everyday lives? How is it relevant to them? And how can you communicate that in a way that's engaging, accessible, and fun? And so we try and we train researchers, we train our speakers to think about what are the key points that they're trying to communicate, how are they trying to get people on board, and how can they have a conversation and discussion with people as well. As you say, we want to broaden the voices that are involved in creating science as well. It's not just about researchers coming and telling people what they found out. It's about getting feedback. It's about listening to other people's opinions and ideas and thoughts and suggestions, because that makes the research better. It makes it richer. It makes it more relevant to more people. And it means that it's going to be more impactful down the line as well. So the more people that feel that they've got a stake in science and stake in research, and that they've got a voice within that, the better the research, the better the outcomes, the better the impact.
Fantastic. And I think listening to that, what strikes me is how integral communication is to science. And not just communication to your peer group. If you're a scientist, you might just be speaking to people who speak literally the same language as you, use the same idioms, the same arcane terminology, but it's really broadening the conversation. I mentioned the conversation because that is actually the conversation is a well-known online, I'm not sure, website, which shares research findings in a very accessible fashion. I can see both James and Sheeba nodding there. I think they're both very familiar with it. Okay.
And that's a great example, because I think, one of the talents that people have is written communication. Some people are really good written communicators, and they can write those fantastic articles. And I enjoy reading the conversation articles. I think they're a great way in. But some people are better at talking. Some people are really great at drawing and graphic arts. Some people, as I say, are musicians and love to communicate. Last year we had the house band from the Met Office talking about climate change through their house band, and they were performing musical songs written about climate change. So everyone's got their own way, I think, of sort of communicating things in really different ways. But what's great is that they find their strength, their way of communicating, and then you get different audiences who, absorb that in different ways as well. So it's, variety really is the spice of life in this sense.
But I'd like to hear from both of you, actually, on the different ways in which we can tell stories within the science arena. Who would like to go first, Sheeba or James?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, we really try and get the broadest possible range of different sorts of storytelling techniques and narrative ways of getting across that research and that science. So I think, looking this year, we've got a live podcast recording, actually. The Guardian are coming and doing one of their Inside Science podcasts, and they're going to be talking about a number of the concerns around AI and companionship, which I think would be great. So they've got about 3 experts who are going to come and debate that and talk about it. And again, I think debates like that really bring a subject to life. You get different opinions, different points of view, different perspectives, and that's a great way of doing it. We've got a drag show this year, which is looking at quantum physics and the gender binary. So thinking about that sort of duality and things, which I think is, again, it's a really lovely way of drawing a metaphor between, what's quite a abstract field in physics and things that people might have sort of lived experience of in their everyday lives as well. We've got exhibitions, we've got film screenings, we've got a film about nuclear fusion, which I think, again, is a great way to see some of these facilities and techniques that you wouldn't be able to see in your everyday life. So you need to be able to see those through the power of a screen. We've got the opportunity to come and talk to scientists and ask them questions and challenge them. We've got debates and discussions. So there's all sorts of different ways, I think, into some of these subjects. Many people, think about what their hobbies are, if they're going to spend the weekend playing football or doing a sport, that might be something. But of course, they're going to be really interested in nutrition and training and sort of looking at data from their fitness trackers and things as well. There's so much science packed into that, and they might not think of themselves as scientists, but they're really interested actually in a lot of scientific topics through their hobbies as well. So we've got events on sport, and we've got nutrition and cooking. We've got events about music. So it's about finding those sort of cultural ways, I guess, into the topic as well, how it's going to be relevant to people and how they're going to make use of some of that information, I guess, on their day-to-day lives.
And I think that's really key. If you can relate it to something tangible that's part of someone's normal life, suddenly science becomes a lot more appealing, because people often think it's very abstract. But the other thing I want to pick up here, this is a podcast now, and that's dialogue. And I think this relates to what you were saying, Sheeba, in the classroom. We want to move away, I think, from a slightly didactic approach to science. And it's always that conversation. And we only get to the truth through the old Socratic method of dialogue. And I think that's so key. Is there anything else you'd like to add yourself, Sheeba, on this, in terms of how we find different ways, or more effective ways of telling the stories of science?
I think what British Science Festival is doing is amazing. You know, we've got at UEL the festival, and it'd be really privileged to have that at our doorsteps. We are unshackling the constraints or the knowledge, and it's making it easily accessible for general public. So where research, whether knowledge is kept in a journal article, now it's easily available and it's free. People could come in and book sessions, and something might pique their interest and they might want to study science or research in that area further. But I think coming back to the session that I'm running, which is Unveiling the Hidden Faces in Science, which is on Saturday, 14th September, 3:30. Please do come. We are based in CC 101. Saturday the 14th. Yes. So sorry about that. I just had to publicize it.
Excellent plugging. Perfect.
But that's this. But I think we should think about other ways of improving awareness of representation. Yes, for me, BSF is an amazing start, and I will carry on doing this. And I think I will do more sessions working with schools, raising awareness and thinking about how to enrich the curriculum by using the overseas students that I will have in my sessions, you know, every year. And I'm looking forward to enriching science content. I'll give you a very quick example. For example, talking about halogens, it's a group 7, topic. We talk about the uses and we say, okay, chlorine, chloride, sodium chloride. Yes, that's table salt.
Yep.
And we leave it like that. But I remember years ago talking about it and then asking people, can you think of examples of how sodium chloride or these halogens or halides are used in your country, the country that you've come from? And then somebody said, oh, yes, sodium chloride, salt in India is iodized. And yes, I know I'm from India, so I could add to that. And I said, yes, iodized salt. So do you know the story behind it? It's because deficiency of iodine causes goiter. So if you have that, and that's the way you can very quickly address that, public would have iodized sodium chloride, and that stops that deficiency. So that example was coming from a student, and then I could add to that. But that's a story that stuck. And it's that cognitive anchor where you talk about the hinterland knowledge, isn't it? So you remember those nice examples, and that's the way you're enriching. And I would love to hear more examples on different parts of the curriculum. And I'm pretty sure we can enrich the curriculum that way. It's not just the scientists, but other examples. And people can think, actually, just because I've come to the UK, I have to forget about my country. And that was, I was saying earlier, before the podcast, that when I was interviewing an overseas trainee, he asked me, how do I have to change when I come to your university? And I said, what do you mean? No, how do I have to change? I said, look, you don't have to change. You bring in your individuality. We at UEL, we welcome diversity, and that's how I feel. And for students to feel that sense of belonging, we need to engage them, and they get them to talk about their country, how science was there in their country, and examples and scientists. And that's what I think. It's not just one session for me. I think this is the start of a very long journey, hopefully, and hopefully the impact will be seen soon.
And can I just say, Sheeba, your last point there, that actually almost answers my final question. So what we can do to make universities and research organisations be more inclusive. But what I'm hearing from you and from both of you, it's that human dimension to science, bringing that out. It's not just machines. It's not just faceless people who don't have an identity and don't have artistic interests and musical interests. These are real people, and they're not just white men. And these are all the things that's coming across so cogently and so engagingly, because I think you're both very engaging. That's something else to say. We want to make science accessible, but we also need to make it engaging. Yeah. And I think that's really coming across very strongly to me. I'm going to ask this to both of you. In terms of best practice, in terms of making science more inclusive, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? What we can be doing, what we should be doing to make science more inclusive?
I think talk with your students, include them, ask them about their opinions, and maybe if they don't tell you straight away, don't give up. Ask them to ask their parents, ask their grandparents, and bring those examples, those ideas back to the classroom. Include the students to develop your curriculum.
I think that's fantastic. A key point there, so you mentioned talk, but it's ask. And I think ask is, for me, it goes hand in hand with listening.
That was going to be my word. Listen.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
Go on, James. Yeah.
So I think, what we've realised over the last few years of the festival is that, there's no point us rocking up and saying, here's someone who's found this thing. They're going to tell you all about it. You need to come along because it's really important. That's not going to engage people. That's not interesting. But actually, if you go to a new city, so the British Science Festival is interesting in that we go to a different city every year. And if we turn up to that city and say, well, what's important to people in this city? What are you interested in? What are the issues that you care about? What are some of the challenges that you might have? What are some of the things that you're really excited about? So if you listen, you think about what they're interested in, what they want to know more about. Then you go and find the scientists, the people, the researchers, bring them to the festival to think about those topics and those.
I think I would like to add another word. So ask, listen, and then start the dialogue. We need to talk more and include those discussions when we teach science.
Yeah. I think one thing that people don't realise is how collaborative science is. Again, we started talking about those sort of classic figures like Einstein and Oppenheimer, these sort of individuals. But that's not what science is like. It's collaborative. It's people working together in a lab. It's working and solving problems together. And I think that's really key.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to repeat that for our listeners. So it's ask, listen, but then just walk away, have a dialogue. And I think the dialogue, it's that collaboration, actually, and science is built on collaboration, and more. And again, I play in the band. We got bands performing at your science festival. Bands are all about collaboration and listening, but also expressing yourself. And we want to create a space in science and research where people do feel comfortable to express themselves in a way that they feel comfortable with. But look, go on, Sheeba, want to jump in?
Jump in. A little bit again of publicity. You talked about collaboration. The session on the 14th of September, 3:30, CC 101 on unveiling hidden faces of science. It's not just me.
Okay,
I have got my students from last year who are now working in schools. They are coming and they're going to share their stories. Good. So trainees from Lebanon, Nigeria, India, they're coming in and they're bringing in scientists from their parts of the world, and they're going to be talking about them. So don't forget to be there.
Fantastic. And there's also the whole idea of a chain reaction, because the teacher goes into the classroom, they teach, but then there's a chain reaction, and they're creating another 30 teachers potentially, and ambassadors for science. Yeah. Thanks very much to Dr. Sheeba and to Mr. James, I'll call you today, for joining us. And thank you all to our listeners to listening to the Science Out East podcast. Now, this episode was recorded as part of University of East London's Year of Science. So remember to follow us on our different social media channels. And there you can stay updated on all our current, past and future episodes. And these are really exciting times for University of East London. We're hosting the British Science Festival this week on our campus, and we hope to see our listeners there.